Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Next Brave Thing podcast. I am very excited today to have an amazing, creative boss lady. And that is Katherine Warnock, and she is the Vice President of Content on the television show The Chosen. It's a very popular show that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. But she's also a wife and a mum. And I read in your notes that you also have dual citizenship from the UK and America. That's pretty amazing. But thanks for joining me today, Katherine.
Thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I feel like today I've heard you speak on a number of podcasts. I got to meet you at our Bethel Conservatory of the Arts Artist Summit. And what was striking about you is just your authenticity. And I'm excited I have a lot of executives and people who are in the creative field listening, and I'm excited to see like how you show up authentically in your workplace. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how to do that. So we're going to get into talking about perfectionism and like balancing life and career. But I'd love to kick us off. Like you have, I know you started out as a high school teacher, moved into being a creative director in the fashion industry, and now you're a Hollywood executive, which is so cool. And I'd love to we'll get into more of your story in a moment, but just speaking to The Chosen, I was looking at all the stats for The Chosen, and it's crazy. And these are old stats, so you might have new stats. But The Chosen has 200 million viewers, and then 770 million episode views. And it's one of the most watched TV shows in the world, which is crazy. But I don't know, I think I'd love to kick us off by really talking about why you think the TV show has been so successful.
Yeah, it is. And those numbers are outdated. I'll have to get you the updated numbers.
Yeah.
It's just wild to me. But I think it's the humanity. It's the first time Dallas Jenkins, the director and co-writer of the series, the creator of the series, he's an extraordinary man. He always has, his goal is to bring Jesus down from the stained glass windows. Looking at Jesus, meeting Jesus, the authentic Jesus, who is both human and God, and just encountering a Jesus that laughs, that dances, that blows raspberries, that loves children, but also doesn't hold back on the reality of what he came for. And I think so for the first time, people are seeing that. They're seeing this authentic Jesus portrayed in a multi-season show depiction. And what's even more thrilling is that a vast majority of our cast are not Christians. So yes, this is a faith-forward show, but we very much look at it as a historical drama that really engages audience of all walks of faith. I think the statistics, don't quote me on this, are around only about 50% or so of our audience are active Christians. The rest are either cultural Christians or completely different faith backgrounds. So the makeup of our show, it has something for everyone, and that's extraordinary to see.
That's amazing. And so to explain a bit more about your role, what is it that you do as Vice President of Content?
Yeah, so I oversee all of our kind of new frontier content, I like to call it. So I work on cutting edge projects, whether it's documentary series and collaborations and partnerships, or if it's massive fan events. I work with production to handle all of our kind of mass fan extra days, whether that's Holy Week or Feeding the 5,000, etc. I get to have my hands in a number of very fun pots, but also always pushing the edge of technology and content development. One of our core values at The Chosen is being disruptive. And so my role in particular, I feel like I get to really play in that wheelhouse a lot.
Yeah, I love that. I think from my experience of watching The Chosen, as a visual person and I'm so hungry to know the nature of a real God in an accessible way. And I think that seeing Jesus be a human, but also powerful, and like you mentioned, like navigating the tensions of being like very direct and like on a
Yes.
mission, but also human and relaxed and regulated. Like, so I think I've been impacted by seeing a visual display of his nature. I wonder if you, from being a part of this series, like how has it changed your view of God?
I wouldn't say it's changed my view on him. I don't think of myself as an evangelist per se. I think of myself, I'm more passionate about discipleship and just people maturing in who the fullness of what they were called to be and born to be. So it's changed my perspective on what evangelism can look like, right? Of what just sharing the gospel can look like. And just to see so many different vehicles of society and whether it's socioeconomic or faith backgrounds just engage with the chosen in the way that they are so passionately. It's just
Mm,
showing me how much I feel like in the Western church in particular, how much we've gotten evangelism not wrong. I won't declare wrong, but I would say perhaps skewed.
mm,
Perhaps we've oversimplified and made it so black and white instead of allowing the creator side of God to really come through and tell his own story in a way. Because at The Chosen, we're very
mm.
like hands off. We're very like, God, what is it that you want to do? How do you want to tell this story? That's what I love so much about Dallas and the writers.
Mm.
So I think it's changed my perspective on the creator side of God, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's such a great answer. That's amazing. So, in rewinding backwards in your story, like I'm wondering how you went from like high school teacher to an executive in Hollywood. So, I'd love to hear a bit about your background, your backstory.
Yeah, I think it's really important before I kind of tell you some of the story that you and your audience really understand that I'm weird. I wear it with like a badge as a badge of honor. Like I really love the fact that I'm not normal. I don't process information normal. I don't live my life normal. I live my life as I feel like I personally believe Christians should. So for
Yeah.
me, I became a Christian when I was 20 years old. I was a Division I track and field athlete. For those that don't understand American culture, that's basically the highest level of athletics you can get to before you go pro, is a simplified answer.
Mm.
And so for me, I was here. I'm this elite athlete. We were in a nationally ranked team. And everything's about performance. Everything's about delivering. And everything's about how you're perceived and what you're delivering on, et cetera, et cetera. So it was in the midst of this that I became a Christian. And my life completely changed overnight. And I thankfully didn't really have a lot of kind of faith baggage, if you will, worldview baggage of how to perceive God. I didn't have this innate built-in doctrine from how I was raised. I was raised a thoroughbred Catholic, but it was very cultural. It wasn't, bells and whistles all day, every day. And so I didn't have a lot to overcome, so to speak, in terms of man's view of how God operates, right? So I just start reading the Bible. And I literally go, well, why? Of course, all of this is for today. Every single bit of it is for today. So I started living my life completely from that reality of God will completely do his will when he wants, how he wants, in the timing he wants. I emphasize that twice for a reason. Um, if I truly live a surrendered life,
Mm.
if I truly don't have ambition, if I truly don't have my own dreams per se, if I truly just go, I am a laid down life. My only job is to love you and pick up my cross daily and follow you. And so it was this really like first century expression of church, the best I knew how in the Western American culture. And thus started this really radical journey, much to my parents' chagrin, um, because they're like, she's crazy. What is she doing? She's throwing her life away. But I wasn't. I completely chose to live my life in complete abandonment and trust that his perfect will be done if I find a way to surrender daily. And he has never failed me once. Does that mean I haven't had horrific trials and tribulations? No. The more you decide, I'm convinced to walk this surrendered to God. And let me be clear, there have been seasons where I've middle fingered God. I've been angry. I've wanted nothing to do with him. So let me just be human. Like I definitely
Yeah.
have had my moments where I'm like, you're pissing me off, God. Um, but I'm allowed to have those emotions while I fight to find my surrender again, because he is always good. He is always faithful, and that never changes. I'm just a human who's allowed to have emotions and is allowed to be in process. So thus started this really long journey of I was a high school teacher. I get radically touched by God, radically met by God, supernatural encounters, to where my life changes overnight. Next thing I know, I find myself in Mozambique, Africa, working in the mission field with Heidi and Roland Baker. Mozambique is one of the hardest NGO nonprofit fields in the world. So not even faith mission field, but just in terms of just wars, natural disasters, you name it. And that's where I met my husband. We were essentially an arranged marriage, and we both were subsequently called to Hollywood. Who knows what that means? At the time, you think, oh, I'm going to be an actor, an actress. Like, I just had no grid. I was a high school teacher. I had zero grid for what working in Hollywood meant. I just knew it was like the big, dark Hollywood, right? Quote unquote. And so thus started a really about, I don't know, 7 or so year journey where God really shaped my character, where I really went through a long Joseph season where I went from palace to prison, palace to prison, palace to prison, while he worked out just my character, like what am I really living for? What really matters to me? And that's when he really walked me out of shame, walked me out of performance and perfectionism and the idolatry of, needing to please man, and really walked me into a place of just like, sit me at any table you want, whether it's a prison or a palace, they're going to smell the same to me. And that's the point he brought me to. And that's when I was, as you mentioned, I was a creative director in fashion. I worked in film for a long time. I was head of faith and family content at MGM Film Studios. And then I get laid off, like in the midst of this long story, I get laid off like 7 different times. I had $7 in my bank account. My husband and I having no idea how we're going to pay the bills. And then we struggle with infertility for 7 years. And then we finally are able to have kids. That's a whole other story. And then we get laid off again, have no money. How are we going to support my family? Like, it's real. And then The Chosen comes up.
Wow.
And now I look back and I go, okay, here's The Chosen that's completely disrupting Hollywood in its business model, in its funding model, in its distribution model. Completely revolutionizing the way Hollywood's done in a time when Hollywood is undergoing its own revolution and evolution through, the SAG strike, you name it. And I look back at everything God's brought me through to this juncture, and every single moment, like every single odd job he had me do, or because I just was listening by faith, and I would take a move even though it made no sense in the natural, right? Because if you're trying to work in Hollywood, you like get invested in a film family, and you pay your dues, you work your way up. It's nepotism. It's all the things we think Hollywood is. You don't bounce around and do different like genres. You don't do fashion and then do the church and then you're crazy. Like, I became unemployable because I obeyed God. So on paper, I was unemployable. I couldn't apply anywhere, and they would think I was crazy, like bipolar resume. So then The Chosen comes along. I look back at this bipolar resume and I'm like, oh, I was perfectly shaped for such a time as this. Like, I was perfectly made ready with the skill sets required for kind of a new frontier way, a new wineskin, if you will, if we're going to use it Christianese, a new way of doing things in Hollywood. And so here I am, at one of the biggest TV shows in the entire world, completely built outside of the Hollywood system, but very honoring to the Hollywood system. And I just sit here and I laugh, I giggle. Like, so that's the very quick summary of 20 years for you.
That's crazy. If you were just speaking to me, that we can call this podcast today. This is so good, because I relate to that kind of bipolar resume of like 10 a million things, but like in different fields. And it's so anchoring to come back to surrender. So that's so beautiful. But I can imagine, you mentioned like shame and perfectionism. And I can imagine the tug of war internally of like, I feel like God is telling me to do this random thing, but fear of man might say, if you want a career in Hollywood, you should do XYZ. So I'd love to, I love giving language to things like shame
Mhm.
because, and Brene Brown probably a few, 10 years ago, whenever it was, started giving language to a lot of us around what that
Yes, thank God
was.
for her. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, but I think just listening to a few of your interviews, I think you also bring that language that brings comfort of like, oh, I'm not alone, because shame would want to tell you that you're
Yeah.
alone in it. But tell me like how shame manifested for you. And you talked about prisons.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I think it's important to know parts of my story. So when God put his finger on shame in my life and had me start outworking shame, it was before Brene Brown was even like, she was unheard of. She was probably doing her research at the time, but like
Yeah.
no one knew who she was. It wasn't published. No one could help me. Therapists couldn't help me. Psychiatrists couldn't help, like the church couldn't help me. No one knew how to handle the stronghold that God was starting to unravel in my life.
Mm,
And let me be clear: shame is a byproduct of fallen nature, right? It's quite literally like Adam and Eve ate of the tree. They suddenly knew that they were naked and they were ashamed for God to see them naked, right? So it was an immediate byproduct of the fall. So it's just, we come by it naturally. Every single human on the planet comes by it naturally. But that doesn't mean that needs to be our existence. And some of
mm,
us, it is an even greater stronghold in our lives, whether it be generational or whether it be through abuse. I myself was sexually abused outside of the home,
mm.
and that really, I think, entrenched shame
Yeah.
in particular in my life. And so for me, I like to call them like the bad fruits of shame, because everything has fruit, right? Whether it's bad or good. And so for me, the fruits of shame were control, subconscious
Mm.
manipulation. I didn't understand I was manipulating, but I was
Yeah.
like steering. I was being sly without being innocent, right?
Mm.
Um, so I was controlling. Perfectionism. I had an inability to apologize. I didn't register any of these things. This was just my normal. And the Holy Spirit was so kind, because in the whole process, this 2.5 years of unpacking this, he really just said, Katherine, you had done what you had to do to survive. Like all of these were coping mechanisms for you to survive before you had me. Like
Mm.
you did what you had to do to stay like a sane, functioning human being. He's like, and so he like validated. He didn't go, you're some monster, because it was ruining my marriage. Like we were about to
Mm.
get divorced because these things were so um, subversive in our
Mm.
lives, in our foundational marriage. But then he said, but you have me now.
Mm.
You have me now, and so we need to now let go of these self-protection mechanisms. And so it was a very long journey. Because you have people in the church that want to just label you a Jezebel, for example. I don't know if that's a term that
Yeah.
your audience understands, but
Yeah.
it's a biblical Old Testament name of a very horrible woman
Yeah.
that killed a
Yeah.
lot of people. And so you're like,
Yeah.
wait, why are you associating me with her? I'm just broken and hurt and trying to be met
Yeah.
by Jesus. So, anyways,
Yeah.
um, Jesus really met me, and Holy Spirit, because no one had even a language for it, let alone a way to walk out of it, right?
Yeah.
And so Holy Spirit Himself started just walking me through how to outwork shame and how
Mm.
to find out when shame was operating in my life. So for me, I'm convinced, I'll speak for myself, cannot be a full expression of who God made me to be if shame is an operation in my life. I care too much what other
Mm.
people think when it's an operation. I'm not willing to
Mm.
stand up to status quo because I'm too afraid that I'll lose favor, or I'm too afraid I'll lose
Yeah.
my position, which, let me be very clear, I have suffered all of these ramifications for standing for truth or standing for what God is asking me to do in a moment, but I just simply don't care. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt sometimes. But because shame is no longer an operation, it's not a carrot the enemy can dangle in front of me of like, you're going to lose your place in society. You're going to lose your position at this table if you don't, suck up or manipulate or politically outmaneuver. I'm just like, that stuff just doesn't, I'm like, it makes me, ugh. Whereas old Katherine
Yeah.
would have been like, I would have played the game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that
Wow.
answers your question, but
It's so good. Yeah. Even as you're saying that, I mean, I've having like pastored and coached a lot of people who are making these decisions of like, I'm scared that I'll lose my position if I stand for a conviction or if I show up authentically myself, the way we have this need to fit in and that sort of thing. So I'd love for you to kind of like, if for someone who's like in a crossroads right now, who could, is facing that, do I, fall into the trap of like performing for other people or do I stand in my conviction? How do you process through that? Because I'm sure like now it's like really quick for you to go, well, I have a track record of like, I know what it means to stay connected to what I feel is the truth or whatever. But how did you start working that out when you're like, it's almost like another trust and surrender exercise. So
yeah,
yeah.
I think for me, um, I, I, as a black and white person myself, like, sorry, let me rephrase that. I'm not a black and white person. I'm very much a process person. And so I think as Christians, we can be far too black and white with who God is, what he wants. I think we just assume we know him, understand him, which is just incredibly naive of us. We can do our best. We have the Bible. Thank you, Jesus, for the Bible. But he's still God. And so for me, it couldn't be this righteous black and white answer to everything. If I'm going to take a stand for purity, or I'm going to take a stand for justice. It was no, moment by moment. And this is why it's so vitally important for Christians, whether you're working in the church or outside of the church, to hear his voice and have really clear accountability, that you trust to hear God's voice on your behalf. Because so when God says, be sly as a serpent, as innocent as a dove, two things. It's a command and they coexist. It's one sentence. It's one half to the other half. It's a yin and a yang. You can't, as a Christian, he's saying you can't be innocent, fully innocent, if you're not sly. You won't survive this world, especially if you're not working in the church, right? And so for me, it was like, okay, I can take a continual stand for purity all day long, but if I'm not being sly about it, then I lose the seat of favor at the table that God has gifted me and does want me at. I forfeited that because I'm being too black and white. I'm not allowing him to teach me what it means to be sly in wisdom and innocence. And so for me, as I let go of shame, it then became, okay, what does operating in kingdom wisdom look like instead? Because sometimes it's like a stand, because I remember this, I had to take a stand for purity. I was working at I was creative director at a film studio. And I don't know if you know this, if your audience know this, but horror films make the most money globally.
Oh, I
They're
didn't
just
know
like
that.
the surest bet of making money
Wow.
globally, because comedy doesn't, for example, because everyone, country by country, has different senses of humor. Everyone can agree on horror for some reason. So it's just a
Wow.
guaranteed money generator. At least at the time it was. I don't know in this new model where we're at, because I've stopped making horror. But
Yeah.
so I was basically said, hey, you need to find the next great horror script. And I was like, so I'm having to read Ella horror script after horror script, like diabolical. I'm having to read these scripts. And I remember one night I was just like, Jesus, I cannot do this anymore. Like, this is obviously completely not you. And so I could have taken an immediate stand and I probably would have lost my job, right? But instead, God was like, hey, Katherine, whose job is it to overcome evil? And I was like, whoa, this is a trick question. He's like, it's my job. He goes, it's your job to obey and love, and it's my job to overcome evil. Do you trust me to overcome evil? And I said, yes. And he goes, then I want you to love and obey. And I've put you in this place and you're under this manager's authority. And he's asked you to deliver a script that you think would make millions and millions of dollars. I was like, okay. So I put before him, finally, my boss, I give him a horror script. I was like, this one's great. Like, it's really well done. It's going to make you a lot of money. He's like, great. They start moving forward. Like, I don't know, a week or 2 weeks later, I'm not sure. My boss calls me into his office and he just said, I've had a change of heart. I don't want to do horror anymore. I only want to make projects that put good back into the world.
Wow.
And I
That's
sat there,
amazing.
and in that moment, this man made a decision to lose millions and millions of dollars because God moved his heart. I obeyed and I loved him through it. Like, I didn't judge him. I didn't make him feel disgusting and evil for wanting to make a horror film. Like, I just accepted him for who he was. Because he wasn't a Christian. He wasn't held to the same standards I am. Like, it's not my job to judge him. And God moved on his heart and completely changed his heart. And so in that moment, I was like, oh, if I just taken an aggressive stand for purity,
Yeah.
I would have been fired and lost my seat at the table. But because I listened to God, I obeyed God, and I trusted his timing and his ways above my own naivety, I not only saw a huge shift in the type of content we were making, but I also not only kept my seat at the table, but I was given an elevated seat at the table. Does that make sense, of
Wow.
being sly and
Yes.
innocent versus just black and
Yes.
white?
It's so beautiful. Wow. And I think that, like, even in hearing that, I know a lot of us, we see something that like, whether it's morally wrong or we see something wrong, and we quickly react and go into like, this is wrong.
Yes.
And I love that you actually led us through how you process, like how you actually kind of acknowledge, like, oh, this is a conviction that you're sensing, but then you're not going into a quick reaction to solve
Yes.
it. It's so
Yes.
beautiful. That's so amazing. And I think, I mean, that obviously has come from learning how to hear God's voice and maturing. And I think, in sort of like wrapping up, I mean, a lot of young creatives want to be in the position that you're in, or want to have that level. I mean, I think a lot of people, and myself included, have been guilty of, like, I want favor, like we want that influence. But what would you say to someone who's in their early 20s, like maybe fresh out of drama school, or in a place where they want to go for a career? Like, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. True favor, that is everlasting and can't be turned off.
Mm,
It is begotten in the throne room, on your
mm,
face in worship, like, and in service to God. Like, he is the bestower of true favor. Um, the kind of favor the world gives, in my opinion, is largely narcissistic favor. Like, it's
yes.
toxic favor. It's favor that's like, you earn it and then it can be taken away. It's like a chess piece. That's not how God operates. And so I think first you need to make a decision. What kind of favor do you want? Do you want to be big in the eyes of man, or, honored in the eyes of God? I've chosen the latter, and I pray I continue to do so. But that comes at a cost. That means prisons and palaces. And
Mm-hmm.
so many people that I've met that want to be in Hollywood, two things. They're willing to be compromised because they're so desperate for their dream.
Mm-hmm.
People
Mm-hmm.
ask me all the time, Catherine, what's your dream? I'm like, I don't have a dream. I just want to. Obviously, there are things I would love to do,
Mm.
but I'm like, they're just that. They're things I would love to do. Just like I would love to, like, not ever have to work again and be on a beach cruise for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to happen, but I would still like it.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't have a dream. Like, I just want to get to heaven at the end of my life and hear, well done, good and faithful servant. What does haunt me is I get to heaven, I hear that, but I also hear, but you could have done this, this, and this if you would only have pressed in more. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
haunts me, because I feel like I constantly live in the crux of that, of like, oh Lord, is the human element of me in this season, like, am I dragging? Am I leaving? Am I letting am I losing time, or am I right on time? Like, it's
Mm.
actually something that I
Mm.
process with God a lot, because it's
Yeah.
that important to me.
Mm.
Two, most Christians in this that are so adamantly wanting to be part of this industry. So let me be clear: I didn't want to be part of this industry. I wanted to be a teacher. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
to this day, that's like the best job in the world. They're not willing to pay their dues, especially in Western culture. We're way too entitled, and Hollywood in particular is you pay your dues. But I've actually lost jobs because someone wanted me to pledge my loyalty to them over God. It's actually like very clearly happened. And I lost my job for it. And so I think it's just like who really is your God? Is it your dreams, or is it God himself? And he's allowed to be the creator of your dreams. 2, 3, shaping of character. We all should cry out for Joseph style training. Although it's excruciating at times, we should be desperate for it. I look back and I go, oh, thank you. Every time that I saw God hold me back and instead train me, instead of release me into favor, on the back end of it, I'm always like, oh, thank you so much. Thank you that you loved me so much, that you trained me, that you disciplined me. But in the midst of it, I'm like, God, get me out of this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've learned to be a lot better at that. So those are like some really key things. Obviously, I've already said accountability, learning to hear his voice. But I think we need to do a better job as Christians in general of doing idle checks. Like, what is in the driver's seat of my car? Is it God? Is it myself? Is it my dream? Is it my kids? Is it my marriage? Is it my obsession with ABC? Like, what's in the actual driver's seat? Because it's okay for almost all of those things to be in your car.
Yeah.
Going with you wherever you're going as like part of the scenery and part of the community, if you will. But what's in your driver's seat? So I'm constantly doing an assessment of like, what is actually my driving force? What's my driving force right now?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, we're kind of addicted to pedestals, like either putting people on pedestals or wanting to be in on pedestal. And I just love like that. Yeah, those 3 points of like really realigning our hearts and surrender and feeling untethered to end results. Like, because results are really fleeting anyway. So it's like, it's
true.
real. Yeah. So in kind of wrapping up our time, this has been so many gems coming out from this time. I've loved chatting with you. So the podcast is called The Next Brave Thing. And we've kind of talked about courage, like, willing to kind of let go of the fear of man, the courage that takes. But what does courage look like for you now?
Gosh, in this season, I think it's twofold. I'm really pressing into the power of imagination from a godly perspective. He says, I can do more than you can ever ask, think, or imagine. And I'm really bad at imagining. I'm really bad naturally at dreaming. Like, it's just, some people are extraordinary at it. That's not me. And so I'm having to really learn to flex and develop that spiritual muscle to go, what does it look like to dream and imagine with you, God? Like, through your lens, not through like what I think would be cool, but through your lens, and just really turning that into watching his power fall on it and create, which goes back to my earlier statement about the creator God. And so I don't know if you know who Andrew Womack is, but he's got an amazing book called On the Power of the Imagination. And so I'm really starting to like devour that. And it seems so simple, but that's the gospel. The gospel is so simple, but yet so hard. And so that is taking a lot of courage for me, because it's not natural to me. So I'm having to develop new neural pathways and new rhythms in the way I do life. And it's forcing me to like believe in a new way that God is good.
Yeah. Wow.
And that this isn't just frivolous, right? This isn't like I'm going to get my hopes crushed or whatever. It's so weird.
Yeah.
The second thing is the last year I went through a very horrific season. A number of things had happened that were really excruciating. And this is why it's so important to hear his voice, be able to hear his voice, because he said to me in the midst of it, when everything was kicking off and I was, dying what felt like 1,000 deaths. And he just said, Katherine, if you can choose, because it's a choice, Everything's a choice in the kingdom. If you can just choose not to take things personal, because boy, did they feel personal. He said, you will have victory. And by victory, he means like victory in him, right? I have no concept of what that looks like in the natural, but victory in him where it matters.
Yeah.
And that's all he said. And so for me, I've been on this long journey of just unraveling like how personal I take things. Like we all do. But in my marriage and in the workplace, you name it, of just going, okay, it takes great courage to choose not to take things something personal, to just like let it just go fall off your back. And so I've been on this long journey of like, and I love who I'm becoming. It's like that simple. I'm like, Lord, what does that mean? Don't take things personal, because this person literally betrayed me, and that person was this and this. I was like, this is personal. And he's like, no. He's like, just let me teach you what it means to abide in that place where your identity isn't even touched by the actions of others.
Wow.
And so that's new for me, and it has taken immense courage, but I've loved what it's shaped in me.
Wow. That's amazing. I feel what you carry is like this other world kind of wisdom, you know, and it's just so expansive listening to you. And it's so cool that you're on a journey of going after imagination, because you've just enlarged my imagination just listening to you, and I'm sure my audience would feel the same way. So thank you so much for your time and for coming on the podcast today. It's been such a gift.
Thank you, Ella, for having me on. I love what you're doing. I'll have to come visit sometime.
Yeah, come to Australia.
I would love
my
to.
gosh. Yeah, it's a beautiful country. Yeah, thanks, Katherine. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yay. Well, I think we got you in on time.
Oh, look at you. I hope that was good.
Oh,
I hope that was